The December wind howled through the Arizona territory like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. The vast expanse of red rock and scrub brush stretched endlessly beneath a steel-gray sky, broken only by the occasional saguaro cactus standing sentinel against the approaching storm. This was harsh country, unforgiving to the weak and merciless to the unprepared. Jake Sullivan pulled his coat tighter as he guided his horse through the narrow canyon trail. At 32, he cut an imposing figure against the desolate landscape, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hands hardened by years of honest work. His fortune had come from cattle drives and smart investments in the growing railroad industry, but wealth had brought him little comfort. The saloons held no appeal anymore. The card games felt hollow, and the painted ladies with their practiced smiles only reminded him of the emptiness that gnawed at his soul. The small town of Bitter Creek lay ahead, nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the elements. Dust devils danced down the main street, and the few townspeople brave enough to venture outside hurried about their business with heads down. Jake had come here on a whim, drawn by rumors of available property and the promise of solitude. "That'll be the Harmon place." The land agent, a weaselly man named Cornelius Pike, pointed toward the outskirts of town. "Old man died last spring. Nobody wants it too far from town. Too run down. I'll let it go for 50 cents, just to have it off my books." Jake studied the dilapidated cabin in the distance. It sat crooked on its foundation, the roof partially caved in, surrounded by dead mesquite and tumbleweeds. Most men would have ridden past without a second glance, but something about its loneliness called to him. 50 cents. Jake reached into his vest pocket. "Done." Pike's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with the calculating look of a man who wondered if he'd asked too little. But the coins were already in his palm, and Jake was already riding toward his new property. The cabin was worse up close. Wind whistled through gaps in the walls, and the door hung on one hinge like a broken jaw. Inside, years of neglect had taken their toll. Dust coated every surface, and mice had made nests in the corners. The sparse furniture, a broken table, a three-legged stool, a rusted stove spoke of a life lived hard and ended badly. Jake tied his horse to a sturdy post and began the task of clearing out the debris. He worked methodically, the physical labor a welcome distraction from his thoughts. As afternoon shadows lengthened, he noticed something odd about the floor near the back wall, where everywhere else was covered in dirt and grime. This section showed signs of disturbance. The hay piled there seemed too deliberate, too carefully arranged. His curiosity piqued. Jake knelt and began pulling away the musty straw. His hands froze as they encountered something that shouldn't have been their fabric. Not just any fabric, but what appeared to be lace, yellowed with age and dirt. Heart-pounding, he worked faster, revealing more of what lay hidden beneath. Then he saw her. A woman lay curled in a shallow depression in the floor, her wrists and ankles bound by heavy iron shackles. She wore what had once been a wedding dress, now torn and stained beyond recognition. Her hair, probably once golden, hung in matted tangles around a face gaunt with suffering. For a terrible moment, Jake thought she was dead. Then her eyes opened. They were blue, the pale blue of winter sky, and filled with such terror that Jake instinctively stepped back. A whimper escaped her cracked lips as she tried to press herself deeper into her prison, as if she could disappear into the earth itself. "Easy," Jake said, his voice rough with shock. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him with the wild-eyed look of a trapped animal, her breathing rapid and shallow. Jake's mind raced. Who was she? How long had she been here? The questions could wait. First, he needed to free her from those barbaric chains. He examined the shackles, his jaw tightening with anger. They were old but solid, the locks rusty but functional. Whoever had done this had meant for her to stay put. Jake drew his knife and worked at the locks, speaking softly all the while. My name's Jake Sullivan. I just bought this place. Nobody told me. God almighty. How long have you been down here? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Her throat worked convulsively, but no sound emerged. When the first shackle fell away, she flinched as if expecting a blow. Jake's hands were gentle as he freed her other wrist, then moved to her ankles. The skin beneath was raw and scarred. Can you sit up here? Let me help you. He slipped an arm behind her shoulders, lifting her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, bird bones in desperation. Up close, he could see she was young, probably no more than 25, though suffering had aged her. Despite everything, there was something refined about her features, a delicacy that spoke of a gentler upbringing than this nightmare. Jake shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her trembling form. He fetched water from his canteen, holding it to her lips. She drank greedily, then coughed, unused to the sensation. There's more, he said. Take it slow. As she drank, Jake's mind worked through the implications. Someone had imprisoned this woman here, in a wedding dress, no less. The old man who'd owned the cabin had died months ago, which meant she'd been alone here all that time. The thought made his stomach turn. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the broken door. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising snow before morning. Jake knew he needed to get her somewhere safe, somewhere warm. But first, he needed to know if she could travel. Can you speak? Can you tell me your name? Her lips moved, forming words with obvious effort. When her voice finally came, it was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse. Eleanor Whitman. Eleanor. He tested the name, gentle as handling glass. Who did this to you? Her eyes filled with tears that traced clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. She shook her head, whether unable or unwilling to say. He couldn't tell. All right, we'll deal with that later. Right now, we need to get you out of here. Can you stand? With his support, she managed to get to her feet, swaying dangerously. Her legs, weakened by confinement, barely held her weight. Jake made a quick decision. Scooping her up in his arms, he carried her outside where his horse waited patiently. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Eleanor blinked in the light, shielding her eyes with one thin hand. How long since she'd seen the sky? We're going to town, Jake said, settling her carefully in the saddle before swinging up behind her. There's a doctor there, and... No! The word tore from her throat with surprising force. Please, no town. He'll find me. He'll take me back. Jake felt her trembling increase, real terror in every line of her body. He made a quick decision. All right, no town. I know a place. An old line shack about 5 miles north. We can shelter there tonight. Figure out what to do come morning. She sagged against him in relief, and he wrapped one arm around her to keep her secure as he turned his horse north. As they rode into the gathering darkness, Jake Sullivan wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd come to Bitter Creek seeking solitude and found instead a mystery wrapped in wedding lace and iron chains. Behind them, the abandoned cabin stood silent once more, keeping its secrets, but Jake had a feeling those secrets wouldn't stay buried for long. Someone had put Eleanor Whitman in that makeshift prison, and that someone would likely come looking for her. Let them come, he thought grimly. They'd find Jake Sullivan standing in their way, and he'd face down worse men than those who'd chain a woman like an animal. The first snowflakes began to fall as they rode into the wilderness. 2 souls bound by circumstance and a 50-cent land deal that had changed everything. The line shack materialized from the darkness like a blessing, sturdy walls of adobe and timber standing firm against the rising storm. Jake guided his horse into the small lean-to that served as a stable, working quickly to unsaddle while Eleanor huddled in the doorway, his coat pulled tight around her slight frame. Inside, the shack was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace. a narrow cot, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Jake had used it during cattle drives, and the familiarity of the space eased some of his tension. He got Eleanor settled on the cot before building a fire, the crackling flames soon casting dancing shadows on the walls. "There's some jerky and hardtack," he said, rummaging through the supplies. "Not much, but it'll do until—" He turned to find her watching him with those haunted eyes, tears streaming silently down her face. The sight hit him like a physical blow. I'm not one of them," she whispered. "Whatever you think, I'm not what they said I was." Jake knelt beside the cot, careful to keep his movements slow and unthreatening. "I don't think anything except that you've been through hell. Nobody deserves what was done to you." She studied his face as if searching for deception, finding none. Some of the tension eased from her shoulders. "You're different from the others. The men who came to look at the cabin, they saw me and they left me there. Said I deserved whatever I got." Anger flared hot in Jake's chest. "Then they weren't men worth knowing. Here, you need to eat something." He helped her sit up, noting how her hands shook as she accepted the cup of water he'd heated. The wedding dress, he saw now, had once been fine silk and lace that spoke of money and position. Whatever had brought Eleanor Whitman to that prison beneath the hay, it hadn't been poverty. As she ate, slowly, carefully, Jake busied himself checking the shutters and door. The storm had arrived in earnest, snow driven horizontal by howling wind. They were trapped here for the night at least, possibly longer. He added more wood to the fire and settled into the room's single chair, giving her space. "You must have questions," Eleanor said finally, her voice stronger now with food and warmth. "Only if you're ready to answer them." She pulled the coat tighter, staring into the fire. "My father owned a small ranch near Tucson. We weren't rich, but we were respectable. When Mama died of fever 3 years ago, Papa started drinking. The ranch suffered. Debts piled up." Her voice caught. Then Silas Thornton came calling. Jake knew the name. Thornton owned half the territory's mines and had a reputation for ruthlessness that made even hardened men step carefully. "He offered to pay off all our debts in exchange for—" Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. "In exchange for me. Papa was drunk when he agreed. By the time he sobered up, Thornton had legal papers drawn up. Said I was his betrothed, that backing out would mean ruin for our family." "No piece of paper makes a woman property," Jake said flatly. A bitter smile touched her lips. "You haven't met Silas Thornton. He owns judges, lawmen, entire towns. When I refused, he had Papa arrested on trumped-up charges. Said he'd see him hang unless I agreed to the wedding." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm raged on. "The wedding day came. I wore my mother's dress, but I couldn't go through with it. At the altar, with half the territory's powerful men watching, I said no." She shuddered at the memory. "Thornton's face. I've never seen such rage. He had his men drag me out of the church. Said if I wouldn't be his wife willingly, I'd learn obedience the hard way." "The cabin. One of his properties. He had them chain me there. Said I'd stay until I begged to marry him. He visited sometimes, bringing food and water, making his offers. I always refused." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The visit stopped coming 4 months ago. I thought I would die there." Jake stood abruptly, needing to move, to channel the fury building inside him. "Your father—" "I don't know. Thornton said he was dead, but he lies as easily as breathing." "And no one looked for you? No one questioned your disappearance?" Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "Thornton told everyone I'd run off with a traveling merchant, that I'd shamed my family, in a town where his word is law. Who would challenge him?" Jake paced the small room, his mind working. Silas Thornton was indeed powerful, with money enough to buy whatever justice he couldn't intimidate into submission. But Jake had resources of his own, and more importantly, He had a stubborn streak that didn't take kindly to bullies, no matter how rich. "He'll come for me," Eleanor said quietly. "When he learns the cabin was sold, he'll know someone found me. He won't let me go." "Let him come." Jake's voice was hard as granite. "I've faced down claim jumpers, cattle thieves, and Apache war parties. Silas Thornton bleeds red like any other man." "You don't understand. He owns—" "I don't give a damn what he owns." Jake turned to face her. "No man has the right to chain another human being like livestock. What he did to you, there's no excuse for it, no justification, and I won't stand by and let him take you back." Eleanor stared at him, something like wonder in her eyes. "You don't even know me. Why would you risk—" "Because it's right," Jake said simply. "Because I was raised to believe that strength should protect, not prey upon the weak. Because—" he paused, searching for words. "Because I bought that cabin looking for solitude and found you instead. Maybe that means something. Maybe it's just chance. Either way, you're under my protection now, and I don't take that lightly." Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but these seemed different, cleaner somehow, like spring rain washing away winter's grime. "I don't know how to thank you. Start by getting some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move." He made to settle in the chair for the night, but Eleanor's hand caught his sleeve. "Mr. Sullivan Jake, I need you to understand something. What Thornton did to me, keeping me chained like that, it broke something inside me. I have nightmares. I flinch at shadows. I may never be whole again." Jake covered her hand with his, gentle despite the calluses. "We're all broken in some way. Doesn't mean we're not worth protecting. Now sleep. I'll keep watch." She released him reluctantly and curled onto the cot. Jake added more wood to the fire and settled into his chair, rifle across his knees. Outside, the storm howled its fury, but inside the little shack, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would pit Jake Sullivan's sense of justice against Silas Thornton's cruel empire. As Eleanor's breathing deepened into sleep, Jake studied her face in the firelight, beneath the dirt and exhaustion. He could see the woman she'd been strong enough to defy a powerful man at her own wedding, brave enough to endure months of imprisonment rather than surrender her freedom. That took a kind of courage he respected. His thoughts were interrupted by a sound outside, horses, fighting through the storm. Jake moved silently to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. 3 riders, heads down against the wind, were approaching the shack. Even in the swirling snow, he could see the rifle scabbards, the purposeful way they moved. Thornton's men, somehow, they'd tracked them here. Jake checked his rifle, then his sidearms. 3 against 1 weren't the worst odds he'd faced. He glanced back at Eleanor, still sleeping fitfully on the cot. She'd trusted him to keep her safe. He wouldn't fail her. The riders were almost at the door now. Jake positioned himself behind cover, ready for whatever came next. He'd given Eleanor his word, and Jake Sullivan was a man who kept his promises no matter the cost. The first knock came hard and demanding, rattling the door in its frame. Eleanor started awake, terror flooding her features as she recognized the voice that followed. "Open up. We know she's in there, mister. Thornton wants his property returned." Jake met Eleanor's frightened gaze and put a finger to his lips. Then he called out, voice steady and cold as winter iron. "The lady isn't anyone's property, and you boys best ride on before this storm gets worse." There was silence, then harsh laughter. "Mister, you don't know who you're crossing. Open this door or we'll break it down." Jake cocked his rifle, the sound clear even through the door. "Try it. First man through gets a bullet. Your choice, boys." The standoff had begun. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring before the lead rider spoke again. "Name's Wade Garrett, Mr. Thornton pays me good money to retrieve what's his. No need for bloodshed here." "Then ride on." Jake replied, "Nothing here belongs to Thornton." "The woman does. Legal papers say so." "Papers can burn. The lady stays where she chooses." Eleanor had pressed herself against the wall, trembling. Jake motioned for her to get behind the overturned table, poor cover, but better than nothing. The men outside were conferring in low voices, their words lost to the wind. "Last chance, friend," Garrett called. "We got you 3-1, and more men coming. Be smart." Jake's answer was to shoot the lock off the door, not to open it, but to show his marksmanship. The bullet passed clean through metal and wood, whining off into the night. The cursing outside told him the message was received. "Eleanor," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the door. "There's a trap door under the rug near the back wall. Leads to a root cellar with a tunnel out. If this goes bad..." "I'm not leaving you." "You will if I tell you to. That's not a request." Before she could argue, the assault began. The door exploded inward under a massive boot, and Jake's rifle spoke. The first man threw not Garrett, but a younger gun hand, spun and fell. The second dove to the side, firing wildly. Jake rolled behind the fireplace stones as bullets chewed into the wall where he'd been. Eleanor screamed as a ricochet sparked off the iron stove. Jake came up firing, driving the attackers back. In the chaos, he counted muzzle flashes, 2 outside still, 1 inside behind the overturned cot. They were trying to pin him down. "Give it up. Sullivan." Garrett's voice came from outside. Somehow they'd learned his name. "You Wing Thompson, but he'll live. No harm done yet, but if you keep this up, we'll burn you out." Jake knew it wasn't an idle threat. These line shacks were built solid but would burn readily enough. He needed to change the game. "Eleanor," he hissed. "The cellar, now!" This time she obeyed, scrambling for the hidden door. As she lifted it, Jake laid down covering fire, then made a decision that would have seemed insane to most men. Instead of retreating, he charged. The wounded Thompson was trying to reload. Jake hit him with the rifle butt, sending him sprawling, then dove through the doorway into the storm. The 2 outside were expecting him to ford up, not attack. His sudden appearance caught them flat-footed. Jake's rifle cracked once, twice. 1 man went down clutching his shoulder. Garrett, quicker than his companions, got off a shot that burned across Jake's ribs before Jake's return fire drove him behind the horse trough. The storm was Jake's ally now, cutting visibility to mere feet. He circled wide, ignoring the fire along his ribs, moving like the Apache fighters who'd taught him to ghost through darkness. Garrett was good, but Jake was better. He came up behind the gunman's position, rifle steady. "Drop it." Garrett froze, then slowly set down his weapon. "You're full of surprises, Sullivan." "Turn around, slowly." The gunman turned, hands raised. He was older than Jake expected, grizzled and scarred, with the dead eyes of a man who'd killed too often to remember faces. "You know she's mad, don't you?" Garrett said conversationally. "That's what Thornton says, touched in the head. Sees things that aren't there, tells lies about good men. Funny how madness leaves chain marks on wrists." Garrett shrugged. Some folks need restraining, for their own good. Jake fought the urge to shoot him where he stood. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to collect your friends and ride out. You're going to tell Thornton that Eleanor Whitman is under my protection now. He wants her. He goes through me. You got any idea what you're signing up for? Thornton owns judges, sheriffs, half the territorial government. You'll be a wanted man by week's end." "I've been wanted before." Garrett studied him with those cold eyes. "You're that Jake Sullivan, the one who brought down the Colton gang. Thought you'd retired." "I had. Seems I'm back." A ghost of a smile touched Garrett's lips. "This won't end well for you." "Maybe not, but it'll end worse for any man who tries to take her." Jake gestured with the rifle. "Your friends, get them and go." Garrett moved slowly to collect his wounded men. Thompson could ride with help. The other would need a travois. But Jake figured they'd manage. As they prepared to leave, Garrett turned back. For what it's worth, Sullivan, I got no personal stake in this. It's just business. But Thornton, he takes things personal. Real personal. The girl defied him in public. Made him look weak. He won't let that stand. Then he'll die trying to fix it. Garrett shook his head. You're a dead man, Sullivan. You just don't know it yet. They rode off into the storm. 3 beaten men who'd carry word back to their master. Jake watched until they were swallowed by the white, then returned to the shack. Eleanor had emerged from the cellar, pale but determined. You're hurt, she said, seeing the blood on his shirt. Scratch. I've had worse from barbed wire. She wouldn't be deterred, insisting on checking the wound. It was indeed minor, a graze that would heal clean, but her gentle touch as she cleaned and bound it sent an unexpected jolt through him. When had a woman last shown him such tender concern? We can't stay here, Jake said as she worked. They'll be back with more men. We need to move at first light. Where can we go? Thornton has eyes everywhere. Jake had been thinking about that. North. I've got friends among the Mormon settlements in Utah territory. Good people who mind their own business and don't take kindly to outsiders throwing weight around. We can hole up there while I figure out how to deal with Thornton legally. Legally, Eleanor's laugh was bitter. I told you, he owns the law. In Arizona territory, maybe. But there's federal law too. And I know a marshal in Denver who owes me favors. Interstate kidnapping, false imprisonment, attempted murder. Thornton's built quite a case against himself. Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes for the first time. You really think? I think Silas Thornton's gotten away with evil for too long. Time someone called him to account. Jake winced as she tightened the bandage. But first, we survive. The storm's breaking. We'll rest a few hours, then ride. They settled into wait, Jake back in his chair, Eleanor on the cot. But sleep proved elusive. The violence had shaken something loose between them, created an intimacy born of shared danger. Jake, Eleanor's voice was soft in the darkness. Why did you really buy that cabin? A man like you could have any property he wanted. Jake was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my wife died 3 years ago. Cholera. We'd been married all of 6 months. He stared into the dying fire. After that, nothing seemed to matter much. Made money because I was good at it, but it brought no joy. That cabin? I guess I thought if I found somewhere lonely enough, maybe the hurt would finally make sense. Did it? No, just found a different kind of hurt that needed tending. He glanced at her. Maybe that's answer enough. Eleanor pulled the blanket higher. I'm sorry about your wife. Her name was Mary, gentle as spring rain. With a laugh that could light up a room. She would have liked you, I think, would have admired your courage. I don't feel brave. Brave isn't about feeling. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. You stood up to Thornton when you had everything to lose. That's brave as it gets. They fell silent again. But it was a comfortable silence now, weighted with understanding. Outside, the storm was finally dying, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. Come dawn, they'd flee across that white expanse, pursued by violent men serving a violent master. But for now, in this humble shack warmed by firelight and newfound trust, they were safe. Jake Sullivan had given his word, and Eleanor Whitman had placed her faith in a stranger's protection. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The first pale light of dawn was just touching the windows when Jake rose to prepare for their journey. They had miles to cover and dangers to face, but something had changed in the night. They were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were allies, perhaps even friends, bound by shared purpose and growing respect. Ready? Jake asked as Eleanor emerged from the shack, wrapped in his heavy coat and looking small but determined. She nodded, chin high despite the fear he could see in her eyes. Ready. They mounted Jake's horse, Eleanor in front where he could shield her with his body if needed. As they rode north into the pristine morning, leaving the blood-stained shack behind, Jake made a silent vow. Whatever it took, however long it required, he would see Eleanor free of Thornton's shadow. The sun climbed higher, setting the snow-covered desert ablaze with diamond light. Behind them, their tracks stretched back toward danger. Ahead lay uncertainty, hardship, and hope. They rode on, two souls against the wilderness and whatever dark forces Silas Thornton would send after them. The town of Cedar Falls appeared before them after 2 days of hard riding, its main street bustling with the commerce of a growing frontier settlement. Jake had hoped to pass through quietly, restocking supplies before pushing north, but he'd underestimated how quickly word traveled in the territories. They'd barely tied up at the general store when the whispers started. Eyes followed Eleanor despite the men's clothing Jake had procured for her, the oversized hat that hid her matted hair. Perhaps it was the way she moved, still bearing traces of refinement despite everything. Or perhaps someone had recognized Jake himself. Keep your head down, he murmured, guiding her into Holbrook's general store. We'll make this quick. The proprietor, Samuel Holbrook, was a fair man who'd dealt honestly with Jake in the past, but today his face was troubled as he filled their order ammunition. Dried beef, coffee, blankets for the cold nights ahead. Jake, Holbrook said quietly, glancing around his empty store. There's been talk. Riders came through yesterday, asking about a man and woman traveling north. They're offering good money for information. How much? Jake asked, keeping his voice level. $500. Holbrook's eyes flickered to Eleanor. That's more than most folks see in 2 years. Jake laid extra coins on the counter. I appreciate the warning, Sam. I ain't seen nothing, Holbrook said firmly, sweeping the coins into his till. But Jake, there's more. Thornton himself is coming. Word is he'll be here by nightfall with 12 men and papers from a territorial judge. Claims she's... He lowered his voice further. Claims she's mad. That she needs to be returned to his care for her own safety. Eleanor's hand found Jake's arm, gripping tight. He covered it with his own, steadying her. We'll be long gone by then, Jake said. Will you? Holbrook gestured toward the window. Look outside. Jake looked. His heart sank. 3 men lounged across the street, trying to appear casual but watching the store intently. 2 more stood at either end of the street. They were already boxed in. Back door, Jake asked. Leads to the alley. But they'll have thought of that too. Holbrook hesitated, then said, There is another way. My cellar connects to the old mine tunnels, comes out near the livery stable. You could get your horses. Sam, I can't ask you to. You ain't asking. I'm offering. The storekeeper's jaw set stubbornly. My Beth died in childbirth last year, watching her suffer, unable to help. I wouldn't wish that helplessness on any man or woman. He looked directly at Eleanor. Whatever Thornton claims, I know a scared woman when I see one, and I know chain marks when they're staring me in the face. Eleanor pushed back her sleeves, revealing the still raw wounds around her wrists. Thank you, she whispered. Holbrook led them quickly to the cellar, lifting a hidden panel that revealed rough-hewn steps descending into darkness. Follow the main tunnel. Take the second left, then straight on. You'll smell the horses before you see the exit. God go with you both. The tunnels were close and dark, remnants of Cedar Falls' brief mining boom. Jake led the way, one hand on the damp wall, the other holding Eleanor's. Her breathing was quick, panicked after months of imprisonment. These close quarters must be torture. Almost there, he said. You're doing fine. They emerged behind the livery stable as Holbrook had promised. Jake's horse was there, along with a sturdy mare he'd planned to purchase. The stable boy dozed in the hay, making it easy to leave payment and slip away unnoticed. They were mounting up when the commotion started on Main Street. Shouts, running feet, angry voices. Their escape had been discovered. "Ride," Jake commanded, and they spurred their horses toward the North Road. But Thornton's men had anticipated this. As they rounded the last building, 5 riders blocked their path, guns drawn. At their head sat a man Jake recognized from newspaper sketches, Silas Thornton himself. He was smaller than Jake had expected, neat and compact in an expensive suit despite the dust of travel. His face might have been handsome once, but cruelty had twisted it into something reptilian. His eyes, when they found Eleanor, burned with possessive rage. "My dear Eleanor," Thornton said, his voice cultured but cold. "You've led us quite a chase. Time to come home now." "I'll die first," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than Jake had yet heard it. "That can be arranged." Thornton's gaze shifted to Jake. "Mr. Sullivan, you've interfered in a private matter. I have legal papers here declaring Miss Whitman my ward. Given her mental instability, you're harboring a sick woman who needs care. Funny kind of care that requires chains," Jake replied, hand resting on his gun. Thornton smiled thinly. "Restraints, Mr. Sullivan. For her own protection, she has delusions, makes wild accusations against respectable men. Why, she even claimed I imprisoned her, when everyone knows she ran off with a traveling man." Then explained the shackle marks. "Self-inflicted. Part of her mania. It's all documented here." He patted a leather portfolio. "Signed by Judge Carlton himself." The crowd was growing now, townspeople drawn by the confrontation. Jake saw doubt in some faces. Thornton's story was plausible enough if you didn't look too close. Others seemed troubled, glancing between Eleanor's desperate face and Thornton's smooth assurance. Then Eleanor did something that changed everything. She began to speak. "My name is Eleanor Catherine Whitman," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Daughter of James Whitman of the Box W Ranch. I am of sound mind and body, despite what this man claims. He demanded I marry him to settle my father's debts. When I refused, he had me seized from my own wedding, a wedding I rejected at the altar before witnesses." "Delusions," Thornton interrupted, but Eleanor continued. "He imprisoned me in a root cellar on the old Harmon property, chained me like an animal, left me in darkness with barely enough food and water to survive. 4 months, maybe more, I lost count of the days." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Look at my wrists if you doubt me. Look at what kind of care Silas Thornton provides." She pushed back her sleeves again, revealing the savage marks. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the women pressed forward for a better look, and their faces darkened with anger. "Lies," Thornton snarled, but his composure was cracking. "She did that to herself." "Did I?" Eleanor turned to address the crowd directly. "How many of you know the Harmon place, who would choose to chain themselves in that God-forsaken ruin, who would choose months of darkness and isolation?" "Enough," Thornton drew his pistol. "You're coming with me, willing or not, and if Sullivan interferes, I'll shoot him down legal as you please. He's harboring a fugitive ward of the court." "Your court," Jake said. "You're bought judges, but there's a higher law than what money can purchase." "Thornton." The tension stretched taut. Jake counted the odds: 5 men, all armed, plus however many were still searching the town. The crowd might help or might scatter. Eleanor sat straight in her saddle beside him, trembling but defiant. Then an unexpected voice cut through the standoff. "What's all this about chains and cellars?" Sheriff Tom Morrison pushed through the crowd. Jake knew him by reputation, an honest lawman, in a territory where such men were rare. More importantly, he was one of the few who didn't owe Thornton favors. "Sheriff," Thornton said smoothly, "I'm retrieving my ward. Mr. Sullivan has interfered with a legal matter." Morrison looked at the papers Thornton offered, then at Eleanor's wrists, then back at the papers. "These are signed by Judge Carlton." "Yes," Carlton's in Thornton's pocket," someone in the crowd called out. "Everyone knows it." Morrison held up a hand for silence. "Miss Whitman, you claim Mr. Thornton imprisoned you." "I do." "And can you prove it?" Eleanor's shoulders sagged slightly. "Only these marks. Only my word." "Her word against mine," Thornton said triumphantly. "And I have legal documentation." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Mr. Thornton, if Miss Whitman is truly unstable, surely she needs medical attention. Doc Brennan should examine her, determine her mental state." "Unnecessary. I have a doctor's statement right here." "From your personal physician in Tucson," Morrison interrupted, "who hasn't seen her in months, by your own admission. I think the good people of Cedar Falls would feel better if our own doctor had a look." Thornton's face darkened. "You're overstepping, Sheriff." "Am I? Seems to me if the lady's as sick as you claim, a quick examination would prove it, unless you got reasons for not wanting her looked at." The crowd murmured agreement. Jake saw the trap Morrison was laying. Doc Brennan was thorough and incorruptible. He'd spot signs of prolonged captivity that no mad woman could self-inflict. "This is ridiculous," Thornton snapped. "I have legal papers. Hand her over, or I'll have you all charged with obstruction." "Then charge away," Morrison said mildly. "But Miss Whitman stays under my protection until Doc Brennan clears this up. That's my jurisdiction talking. Mr. Thornton. And in this town, it trumps your papers." For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Thornton's men shifted restlessly, hands near weapons. Jake prepared to draw, to shield Eleanor with his body if shooting started. Then Thornton smiled, a cold expression that promised retribution. "Very well, Sheriff. But mark me, this isn't over, not by a long shot." He wheeled his horse and rode out, his men following reluctantly. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement. Sheriff Morrison approached Jake and Eleanor. "That bought you time, nothing more," he said quietly. "Thornton will be back with more men, more judges. You can't fight him forever." "Then we run," Jake said. "Or," Morrison said thoughtfully, "you could wire the federal marshal in Denver. Interstate kidnapping is serious business. Thornton's money might buy territorial judges, but federal law is a different animal." Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Jake nodded slowly. "We'll need somewhere safe to wait for a response. My office has good thick walls and a telegraph." Morrison smiled grimly. "Always did want to see someone take Silas Thornton down a peg. Looks like I might get my chance." As they followed Morrison toward his office, Eleanor leaned close to Jake. "Thank you," she whispered. "For believing me, for standing with me." "Always," Jake replied, and meant it. Behind them, the sun was setting over Cedar Falls, painting the sky crimson. Somewhere out there, Silas Thornton was rallying his forces. The real fight was just beginning. The first shots came just after midnight, shattering the windows of Sheriff Morrison's office. Jake pulled Eleanor down behind the heavy oak desk as glass showered across the floor. Morrison cursed, scrambling for his rifle. "So much for legal channels," the sheriff muttered. Jake peered through the broken window. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness across the street, at least 6 shooters, maybe more. They'd waited for the telegraph office to close, cutting off any hope of reaching the federal marshal. "Back door?" Jake asked. "They'll have it covered." Morrison fed shells into his Winchester. "Thornton's not taking chances this time." Eleanor huddled against the wall, but her eyes were fierce rather than frightened. "Give me a gun." Jake hesitated, then handed her his backup revolver. "You know how to use it." "Papa taught me." She checked the cylinder with practiced ease. "I won't be taken alive. Jake, I can't go back to that darkness." "Nobody's taking you anywhere," Jake promised. The shooting intensified. Thornton's men were trying to pin them down while others moved to flank. Jake could hear boots on the boardwalk, whispered commands. They were running out of time. Then came Thornton's voice, amplified by a speaking trumpet. "Sheriff Morrison, you're harboring a dangerous woman and a wanted man. Send them out, and no harm comes to you." "Go to hell, Thornton," Morrison shouted back. The answer was another volley of gunfire. A lantern exploded, plunging the office into darkness save for moonlight streaming through broken windows. In the chaos, Jake heard something else movement on the roof. "They're above us," he hissed. Morrison pointed to a trap door in the ceiling. "Storage space. If they get up there." Jake was already moving, pulling a chair beneath the trap door. He just reached for it when the wood splintered. A man dropped through, gun raised. Jake's fist connected with his jaw before he could fire, sending him crashing into the cell bars. More boots on the roof. They couldn't defend both levels. Jake made a decision. "Eleanor, Morris in the cells, now." They retreated to the jail cells at the back of the building. The iron bars wouldn't stop bullets, but they'd slow down anyone trying to rush them. Jake dragged the unconscious intruder with them, an idea forming. "Hey," he called out. "Thornton, I've got one of your boys. Pete Sawyer looks like... Be a shame if he caught a stray bullet." The shooting paused. Jake pressed his advantage. "Here's the deal. You pull back. Let us walk out of here peaceful-like, and Pete goes free. Otherwise..." He let the threat hang. "You wouldn't," Thornton called back. But uncertainty colored his voice. "Try me. I've got nothing to lose, and your man's got everything." Sawyer was stirring, groaning. Eleanor kept the revolver trained on him while Jake watched the windows. Minutes crawled by. Finally, Thornton spoke again. "Oh, 1 hour. You release Sawyer, then you come out. You have my word you won't be shot down." "Your word isn't worth spit," Morrison called out. But Jake was thinking, an hour might be enough. "Morrison, that old mine tunnel under Holbrook's store, where else does it connect?" The sheriff's eyes widened with understanding. "The old assay office, the church basement, and the telegraph office. Can you find your way in the dark?" "Born here, know those tunnels like my own hands." Jake turned to Eleanor. "You go with him. Get to the telegraph. Wire Denver." "No," her voice was firm. "We stay together or not at all." "Eleanor, I won't run while you fight my battles." She faced him squarely. "I've been helpless long enough. Jake, don't ask me to be helpless again." He saw the steel in her, the same courage that had let her survive months of captivity. Arguing would waste precious time. "All right, Morrison, you go. Wire Marshal Coleman in Denver. Tell him everything. We'll hold here." Morrison looked between them, then nodded. "Give me 15 minutes to reach the tunnel entrance in the back alley. I'll need a distraction." "Leave that to us." Jake checked his ammunition. "Sawyer, you're going to help us out." The captured gunman sneered, "Like hell." Jake smiled coldly. "Your choice, but your boss seems mighty concerned about your welfare. Be ashamed to disappoint him." When Morrison signaled his readiness, Jake hauled Sawyer to the window. "Thornton, I'm sending your man out. Nobody shoots." "Understood." "Send him..." Jake shoved Sawyer through the door, then immediately opened fire on the positions across the street. Eleanor joined in, her shots surprisingly accurate. In the confusion, Morrison slipped into the night. The battle resumed with renewed fury. Jake and Eleanor fell into a rhythm, one shooting while the other reloaded, constantly moving to avoid return fire. The office was being shot to pieces around them, but they held on. "You're good with that pistol," Jake said during a brief lull. "I told you Papa taught me." She smiled grimly. "He said a woman alone needed equalizers. Never thought I'd use his lessons like this." A crash from the front. They were trying to break down the door. Jake grabbed the sheriff's shotgun, waiting. The door burst open and he fired both barrels. Men screamed, tumbling back. but more were coming. The roof again, Eleanor warned. They could hear boots directly overhead. Any moment, more men would drop through. Jake looked around desperately for options. His eyes fell on the oil lamp Morrison kept for the cells still intact, still full. "Get ready to run," he told Eleanor. He lit the lamp and hurled it at the ceiling. The wood, dry as tinder, caught immediately. Flame spread with alarming speed, but it would force the men off the roof. Now! They burst from the cells as burning debris began falling. The front door was blocked by wounded men, so Jake kicked through the side window. He lifted Eleanor through, then followed. They ran down the alley, gunfire chasing them. A figure loomed from the shadows. Wade Garrett, the gunman from the line shack. His rifle swung toward Eleanor. Without thinking, Jake stepped between them, firing as he moved. Garrett spun away, clutching his side. "This way!" Eleanor gasped, pulling Jake toward the church. They stumbled through the cemetery, using headstones for cover. Behind them, the sheriff's office was fully ablaze, lighting up the night sky. Shouts and confusion filled the air as the fire spread to neighboring buildings. The church doors were locked, but Jake shot the lock off. They barricaded themselves inside, panting heavily. Through the windows, they could see men searching, but the fire was drawing more attention. Half the town was forming a bucket brigade. "Morrison must have made it," Eleanor whispered. "How long until help arrives?" "If he reached the telegraph, day and a half, maybe 2. Can we last that long?" Jake checked his ammunition, running dangerously low. "We'll have to—" A new voice called from outside. Not Thornton, but Reverend Daniel Hayes, the church minister. "Jake Sullivan, Miss Whitman. I know you're in there." Jake tensed, but the Reverend continued. "I'm alone? Let me in, please." After a moment's hesitation, Jake unbarred the door. The elderly minister slipped inside, his face grave. "Half the town's fighting the fire," he said. "Thornton's men are scattered, trying to help. You've got maybe 10 minutes before they reorganize." "Why are you helping us?" Eleanor asked. Hayes looked at her kindly. "I performed your mother's funeral service. Child. She was a good woman. When I heard what Thornton did to you," his jaw tightened. "Some sins cry out to heaven for justice. Come, there's another way out." He led them to the vestry, where a hidden door opened onto a narrow passage. "This leads to my house next door. You can slip out the back while they're watching the church." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor caught the minister's arm. "My father, is he—" "Alive. Last I heard, in prison at Yuma. Thornton made sure of that." Tears filled her eyes, but there was no time for grief. They followed the passage, emerging in the minister's modest home. Through the windows, they could see the orange glow of the fire, now consuming multiple buildings. "The livery stable," Jake said. "We need horses." "Too dangerous," Hayes protested. "Thornton's men—" A tremendous crash interrupted him. The church roof had caught fire, sending up a pillar of sparks. In the chaos that followed, Jake saw their chance. Now, while everyone's distracted, they slipped out the back, Eleanor's hand in Jake's as they ran through the shadows. The whole town seemed to be in the streets, fighting the inferno. Jake spotted their horses, left tied behind the general store. They were mounting up when Thornton himself appeared, disheveled and furious. His fancy suit was singed, his face streaked with soot. He raised his pistol. "Enough, you've destroyed half my town." "Your town," Jake laughed harshly. "These people aren't your property. Thornton, neither is she." "She belongs to me." Thornton's composure finally shattered completely. "I paid for her. Her father sold her fair and square. She's mine by right." "I'm no one's property," Eleanor shouted. "I'm a free woman, and I'll die free rather than live in your chains." Thornton's face twisted with rage. He aimed at Eleanor. Jake saw his finger tighten on the trigger and knew he couldn't draw in time. The shot rang out, but it was Thornton who staggered. Behind him, Wade Garrett lowered his smoking gun, blood still seeping from his own wound. "Nothing personal, miss," Garrett said weakly. "But I've done enough evil for one lifetime. Maybe this squares it some." Thornton fell to his knees, looking at his chest in disbelief. You shot me. I paid you." "Payment's no good in hell," Garrett replied, then collapsed himself. Jake and Eleanor didn't wait to see more. They spurred their horses north, leaving the burning town and dying men behind. As they rode, Eleanor wept not for Thornton, but for all the pain, all the loss, all the darkness she'd endured. "It's over," Jake told her. "He can't hurt you anymore." "Is it?" She looked back at the glow on the horizon. "His men, his judges, his influence, will it die with him?" "We'll face whatever comes, together." She straightened in her saddle, wiping away tears. "Yes, together." They rode on through the night, two souls forged by fire and bound by something stronger than chains trust, hope, and the first stirrings of a love born from courage in the face of darkness. The cave Jake found was little more than a hollow in the mountainside, but it offered shelter from the bitter wind that cut through the high country. They'd been riding for 3 days, pushing north through increasingly rugged terrain, always watching their back trail for pursuit. Eleanor huddled near their small fire while Jake tended to the horses. The altitude made breathing difficult, and snow had begun falling again, covering their tracks but also making travel treacherous. She watched him work, noting how he favored his left side, a reminder of their escape from Cedar Falls. "You're hurt worse than you let on," she said when he returned to the fire. "I'll manage." "Jake Sullivan, you've been managing for 3 days." "Let me see." He started to protest, then gave in to her steady gaze. Beneath his shirt, the bullet grays had become infected, angry red streaks spreading from the wound. Eleanor's breath caught. "Why didn't you say something?" "I couldn't afford to slow down. Thornton's men." "Thornton is dead." She began cleaning the wound with melted snow, her touch gentle but firm. "His men are scattered, probably fighting over his holdings. You're no good to anyone if fever takes you." As she worked, Jake studied her face in the firelight. The gaunt, terrified woman he'd found beneath the hay was changing. Hardship had brought out strength, and freedom was slowly healing what captivity had broken. Her hair, washed in a mountain stream, caught golden highlights from the flames. "There," she said, tying off the bandage. "That should hold until we find a proper doctor." "Thank you." "No, Jake, thank you for everything." She settled beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "I've been thinking about what comes next. Even with Thornton dead, the legal papers still exist. In the eyes of the law, I might still be considered his ward. Marshal Coleman will sort that out when he arrives. Morrison's telegram? If it got through, if Coleman received it, if he believed it." Eleanor stared into the fire. "I need to tell you something. About those months in the cellar." Jake waited, knowing some stories needed their own time. "At first, I fought, screamed until my voice gave out, pulled at the chains until my wrists bled. Thornton would visit, always so calm, so certain I'd break." Her voice dropped. "He never touched me, not that way. He wanted submission, not just of body but of spirit. Said he'd wait forever if needed." "Eleanor, you don't have to." "I do, because part of me did break. Jake, after the 2nd month, when the food stopped coming regular, when the water ran low, I started seeing things, hearing voices, my mother, calling me home, my father, apologizing. Tears tracked down her cheeks. I talked to shadows, sang to keep the dark at bay. Some days I couldn't remember my own name." Jake pulled her against his side, feeling her tremble. "You survived. That's what matters." But what if Thornton was right? What if I am mad? You're the sanest person I know. What you endured would have broken most folks completely. You bent, but you didn't break. That's strength, not madness. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, in the darkest times, I'd imagine freedom, not just leaving the cellar, but real freedom. Having choices, going where I pleased. Maybe even finding someone who'd see me as more than property or burden. She looked up at him. I never imagined it would be a grumpy cowboy who bought my prison for 50 cents. Despite everything, Jake found himself smiling. Grumpy. You grunt more than you talk, always scowling at something, but her eyes were warm. Also brave, and kind, and stubborn as a mountain. The wind howled outside their shelter, but inside, the fire created a small world of warmth and growing intimacy. Jake knew he should maintain distance, keep things proper, but after what they'd survived, propriety seemed a hollow concern. My Mary used to say I was too serious, he said. Always planning, always working. She'd drag me to dances, make me laugh at silly things. He paused, surprised at how easily the words came. I shut that part of myself away when she died. Easier than feeling. And now I'm sitting in a cave with a half-mad woman who shoots better than most men and makes me want to be better than I am. Eleanor laughed, a sound like spring water over stone. Only half mad. On your good days. She swatted his arm, then grew serious again. I need to find my father. If he's truly in Yuma prison, we'll find him. Get him freed too. Thornton's crimes are unraveling. His whole empire was built on fear and lies. Without him to maintain it, witnesses will come forward. You sound certain. I am, because I've seen what courage can do. He touched her face gently. You stood up in that street and spoke truth to power. That kind of courage is contagious. Eleanor leaned into his touch. I wasn't brave. I was desperate. Same thing. Sometimes. The fire was burning low. Jake added the last of their wood, knowing they'd need to move at first light, find lower ground, better shelter, maybe even a town where they could resupply without fear of Thornton's reach. You should sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. Wake me for second watch. You need rest too, especially with that wound. He agreed, though privately planned to let her sleep through. She curled up near the fire, using her coat as a pillow. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. Jake sat with his back to the cave wall, rifle across his knees, watching the snow fall beyond their shelter. He thought about the strange turns life took. A month ago, he'd been wealthy but empty, going through motions without purpose. Now he was on the run, wounded, protecting a woman who'd been through hell, and he felt more alive than he had in years. Eleanor stirred in her sleep, mumbling something, without thinking. Jake reached out and smoothed her hair, the gesture tender and protective. She quieted, a small smile crossing her face. Rich Cowboy bought an old cabin for 50 cents, then found a shackled bride hidden beneath the hay. He murmured to himself. It sounded like something from a dime novel, too fantastic to be real. Yet here they were, and the connection growing between them was the most real thing he'd felt since Mary's death. A sound outside brought him allured horses, moving slow through the snow. Jake eased to the cave mouth, peering into the darkness. 3 riders, following their trail. In the moonlight, he recognized one profile, Samuel Crenshaw, Thornton's former attorney. So some of the organization had survived after all. Jake weighed options. Wake Eleanor and run, the horses were exhausted. Wouldn't last long in a chase. Fight 3-to-1 odds in close quarters. With Eleanor at risk. Hide and hope they passed by. The riders were closer now, clearly following tracks. They'd find the cave soon. Jake made his decision. Moving silently, he woke Eleanor with a hand over her mouth. Her eyes went wide, then understanding as he pointed outside. He handed her the rifle, then picked up a fist-sized rock. When the first rider appeared at the cave mouth, Jake was ready. The rock caught the man in the temple, dropping him instantly. Jake grabbed the falling body, using it as a shield as the second man fired. Eleanor's rifle cracked, and the shooter spun away. Crenshaw, the third rider, tried to flee. Jake commandeered the unconscious man's horse and gave chase. The lawyer was soft, unused to hard riding. Jake caught him within 100 yards, pulling him from the saddle. "Don't kill me," Crenshaw squealed. "I'm just a lawyer." "You're Thornton's creature," Jake growled. "You drew up those papers, helped him imprison her." "I had no choice. He owned me, owned everyone. He's dead. Your obligations died with him." "Did they?" Crenshaw's eyes glittered with cunning. "There are others interested in Miss Whitman. Her father's ranch sits on valuable land copper deposits, water rights, with her declared incompetent. Whoever controls her controls that wealth." Jake's fist connected with the lawyer's jaw. "Nobody controls her, ever again." He tied Crenshaw securely, then returned to the cave. Eleanor had disarmed the wounded gunman and stood guard, calm despite the violence. 3 horses, she observed. Fresh supplies in their saddlebags. And information? Jake hauled Crenshaw inside. "This snake's going to tell us exactly who else is hunting us." The interrogation was brief but illuminating. Thornton's empire was indeed crumbling, but several of his lieutenants were trying to salvage pieces. Eleanor was seen as a valuable asset. Control her inheritance. At least 2 groups were searching for them. "There's more," Crenshaw whimpered. "Your father Thornton had him transferred to a work camp. Conditions there. Most men don't last 6 months. Eleanor went very still. "Where?" "The Crimson Canyon Camp, north of Phoenix, but it's heavily guarded. And the warden is bought and paid for," Jake finished, like everyone else in Thornton's pocket. Dawn was breaking, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Jake made quick decisions. They'd take the fresh horses and supplies, leave the 3 men tied but alive. Killing them would only add murder charges to their troubles. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor caught Jake's arm. "We're going after my father." "Eleanor, I won't abandon him, not when there's a chance." Jake saw the determination in her eyes and knew argument was useless. Truth be told, he wouldn't have respected her if she'd chosen differently. "All right, but we do this smart. No charging in blind." She nodded, then surprised him by stretching up to kiss his cheek. "Thank you for understanding." They rode out as the sun climbed higher, 3 men groaning in their wake. The trail ahead led to danger, but also to hope for justice, for family reunited, for something more growing between 2 souls who'd found each other in the darkness. The mountains fell away behind them as they descended toward the desert, toward a confrontation that would test every hard-won bit of courage they'd found in each other's company. The courthouse in Phoenix stood like a monument to false justice, its white pillars mocking the corruption within. Jake and Eleanor sat in the packed courtroom, watching as Judge Marcus Whitfield, one of the few not owned by Thornton's money, reviewed the stack of documents before him. 3 weeks had passed since their escape from the mountains. Marshal Coleman had arrived with federal authority, investigating Thornton's crimes and the web of conspiracy surrounding Eleanor's imprisonment. What they'd uncovered shocked even hardened lawmen. "Miss Whitman." Judge Whitfield addressed Eleanor, who stood straight despite the whispers from the gallery. "You stand accused by various parties of mental incompetence, of requiring guardianship, of making false accusations against respectable citizens. How do you answer?" Eleanor's voice rang clear. "I answer that I am of sound mind. Your Honor, I answer that I was imprisoned against my will, held in chains for months by men who sought to steal not just my freedom, but my very identity. I answer that the only madness here is a system that allowed such evil to flourish." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Whitfield gavelled for order. District Attorney Harrison Blackwood rose, though connected to Thornton's circle. He'd agreed to prosecute fairly under federal oversight. Your Honor, we have depositions from multiple witnesses who claim Miss Whitman suffers from delusions. Witnesses who were paid by Silas Thornton. Eleanor interrupted. I have proof. She produced a leather journal, Thornton's personal records, retrieved from his estate. Every bribe, every threat, every purchase testimony, it's all here in his own hand. Jake had found the journal while helping federal agents search Thornton's properties. Its contents had turned several of Thornton's allies into prosecution witnesses, eager to avoid federal charges. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, I call witnesses of my own, Reverend Hayes, who knew my family for years, Dr. Brennan, who examined my injuries, Sheriff Morrison, who saw firsthand the violence Thornton employed. One by one, they testified. Hayes spoke of Eleanor's character, her mother's dignity, her father's descent into despair. Brennan detailed injuries consistent with prolonged imprisonment. Morrison, his arm still in a sling from the fire, described the attack on his office. Then came the surprise witness Wade Garrett, alive despite his wounds, wheeled in to testify. I worked for Thornton nigh on 10 years, Garrett said, his voice rough. Did things I ain't proud of, but what he done to that girl? He looked directly at Eleanor. I helped hunt her, helped keep her prisoner. I'm ready to pay for my crimes. But first, the truth needs telling. Garrett's testimony was damning. He detailed Thornton's obsession, the careful legal manipulations, the bribes and threats that kept Eleanor's imprisonment secret. He told of other women who'd disappeared, other families destroyed by Thornton's greed. He saw people as property, Garrett concluded. Things to be bought, sold, controlled. Miss Whitman had the courage to say no. That's not madness. That's honor. The opposition's case crumbled. Their paid witnesses recanted under federal questioning. Documents proved forgery. Even Crenshaw, the lawyer, turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. During a recess, Jake found Eleanor on the courthouse steps, taking deep breaths of free air. The strain showed in her face, but also strength that grew daily. You're doing fine, he said softly. Am I? Sometimes I feel I'm still in that cellar, that this is just another dream. She gripped his hand. Tell me it's real. It's real. You're free. And after today, legally free too. She leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. They'd grown closer during the weeks of preparation. Though neither had spoken of feelings beyond friendship, there was too much at stake, too much to resolve. Mr. Sullivan. A clerk appeared. Judge Whitfield wants to see you both in chambers. They found the judge reviewing more documents, Marshal Coleman beside him. Whitfield's expression was grave. Miss Whitman, Mr. Sullivan, we have a problem. While Thornton is dead and his immediate network dismantled, there are broader implications. He held up official-looking papers. These are deeds and contracts affecting dozens of families. If we void them all as fraudulent, innocent people who bought property in good faith could lose everything. What are you saying? Eleanor asked. I'm saying justice isn't always simple. We need someone with standing to help untangle this mess. Someone who understands both the law and the human cost. He looked meaningfully at Eleanor. Your father's ranch, Miss Whitman, sits at the center of several disputed claims. With your cooperation, we could establish a trust, use Thornton's seized assets to compensate victims while protecting legitimate interests. You want me to manage Thornton's money? Eleanor's voice held revulsion. Transform it, Coleman corrected. Turn blood money into restitution. It would take time, dedication, but you'd be uniquely positioned to help those Thornton hurt. Jake saw Eleanor wrestling with the proposal, to take on such responsibility after what she'd endured. I'll need help, she said finally. Legal advisors who can be trusted, and... She glanced at Jake. Other support? Of course. We'll establish a board. Federal oversight. I meant personal support. Eleanor's chin lifted. Mr. Sullivan has been my protector through all of this. I trust his judgment. If I do this, I want him involved. Jake started to protest he was no businessman. No legal mind, but Coleman cut him off. Actually, that's not a bad idea. Your reputation for honesty is well known. Sullivan, people would trust a board with you on it. They returned to the courtroom for Whitfield's verdict. The gallery was fuller now. Word having spread of the morning's revelations. Jake spotted several of Thornton's former victims, faces marked by hope and fear. After reviewing all evidence, Judge Whitfield began. This court finds Miss Eleanor Whitman to be of sound mind and body, fully capable of managing her own affairs. All documents claiming otherwise are declared fraudulent and void. Cheers erupted. Eleanor sagged with relief, tears streaming down her face. But Whitfield wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court recognizes the grave injustices perpetrated by the late Silas Thornton and his associates. Federal prosecution of co-conspirators will proceed. Assets seized from the Thornton estate will be placed in trust, with Miss Whitman as primary trustee, to compensate victims and restore rightful property claims. He looked directly at Eleanor. Miss Whitman, this court also orders the immediate release of your father, James Whitman, from Crimson Canyon Work Camp. Evidence shows his imprisonment was based on fabricated charges. He'll receive compensation for wrongful incarceration. Eleanor couldn't speak through her tears. Jake supported her as observers pressed forward with congratulations. Questions. Pleas for help. He guided her through the crowd to a quiet side room where she could compose herself. "Papa's coming home," she whispered. "After everything, he's coming home. And you'll have a home to bring him to. The ranch is yours again, free and clear." She looked up at him, emotion swirling in her eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you, any of it." "You're stronger than you know." "Maybe, but strength is easier when you're not alone." She took a deep breath. "Jake, when I take on this trust work, I'll need, that is, I want—" She stopped, frustrated. "Why is this harder than facing down a courtroom?" Jake touched her face gently. "Take your time. We've got plenty now." "Do we? You have your own life, your own business? I can't ask you to—" "Eleanor." He waited until she met his eyes. "That life felt empty before I found you. These weeks, working beside you, seeing your courage. I haven't felt this alive since Mary died. If you'll have me, I'd like to see what we might build together. Even knowing how broken I still am, the nightmares, the fears that may never fully heal. We're all broken somehow. Maybe that's why we fit." She kissed him then, there in the quiet room with justice newly won and future spreading before them. It was gentle, tentative, but full of promise. A knock interrupted. Coleman entered, grinning. "Hate to intrude, but there's someone here to see you. Miss Whitman." They followed him out to find a gaunt, gray-haired man standing uncertainly in the hallway. Eleanor gasped, then flew into his arms. "Papa?" James Whitman held his daughter like she might vanish, both of them crying. Jake stepped back, giving them space, but Eleanor caught his hand and pulled him forward. "Papa, this is Jake Sullivan. He saved me. He saved everything." The older man studied Jake with eyes much like his daughter's. "Then I owe you more than I can ever repay." "No, sir. Your daughter's courage saved herself. I just provided backup." James smiled sadly. "Courage. Yes, she gets that from her mother. I'm afraid I showed precious little when it counted." "You survived," Eleanor said firmly. "That took courage too, and now we have work to do. Wrongs to right." She looked between her father and Jake. "All of us, together." As they left the courthouse, Phoenix spreading before them under azure skies, Jake reflected on the strange paths life took. He'd bought a broken-down cabin seeking solitude and found instead purpose, love, and a future worth building. The work ahead would be challenging untangling Thornton's web, helping victims rebuild, creating something good from so much pain, but standing there with Eleanor's hand in his, her father beside them. Jake knew they were equal to the task. The West was changing, slowly and sometimes painfully. Men like Thornton, who saw people as property, were giving way to those who understood justice, dignity, and the courage of one woman who refused to be owned. Rich Cowboy bought an old cabin for 50 cents, then found a shackled bride hidden beneath the hay, Eleanor said softly, echoing his thoughts. And everything changed. Everything. Jake agreed, and kissed her there on the courthouse steps, in full view of anyone who cared to look. Let them look, he thought. Let them see that love could bloom even in the harshest ground, that courage could break any chains, that sometimes the best treasures were found in the most unexpected places. 5 years had passed since the day Jake Sullivan bought that fateful cabin. The small schoolhouse on the outskirts of Willow Creek rang with children's laughter as Eleanor dismissed the afternoon class. She stood in the doorway, watching her students scatter toward home, Apache children running alongside the sons and daughters of settlers, Mexican vaqueros' kids trading marbles with the offspring of former slaves seeking new lives in the territories. Mrs. Sullivan. 8-year-old Sarah Chen tugged at Eleanor's skirts. "Will Mr. Jake really bring horses for us to ride tomorrow?" Eleanor smiled, smoothing the girl's dark hair. "He promised, didn't he? And Mr. Sullivan keeps his promises." As the last child departed, Eleanor surveyed what they'd built. The school stood on land purchased with Thornton's former assets, transformed from blood money into hope. Beside it rose a small clinic where Doc Brennan's young apprentice tended to all who came, regardless of ability to pay. Further down the valley, neat rows of houses sheltered families who'd lost everything to Thornton's greed, now given fresh starts. "Admiring our handiwork," Jake's voice came from behind her. She turned, still feeling that familiar warmth at the sight of him. The years had added lines around his eyes and silver to his temples, but he wore contentment like a well-fitted coat. "Our students' handiwork," she corrected, gesturing to the vegetable garden the children tended. "Little Marcus got his tomatoes to grow despite everyone saying the soil was too poor." "Like his teacher," Jake said, pulling her close. "Making beautiful things grow where others see only barren ground." Eleanor leaned into his embrace, but he sensed the tension in her shoulders. "The nightmares again?" "Less often, but sometimes," she sighed. "Sometimes I still wake expecting to find chains on my wrists. 3 years of freedom can't always erase 4 months of darkness." "No shame in that. We all carry our scars." They walked toward their house, not grand, but solid and welcoming, with a wide porch where neighbors gathered on summer evenings. James Whitman sat there now, whittling while supervising his grandson's attempts to rope a fence post. "Getting better, little Jake," the elder Whitman called out as the boy's lasso finally caught its target. 4-year-old Jake Jr. whooped with delight, his father's gray eyes shining in a face that held his mother's delicate features. Eleanor's heart swelled watching him proof that life and joy could flourish after horror. "Papa, you're spoiling him," Eleanor chided gently. "Grandfather's privilege." James replied, the work camp had aged him severely, but managing the ranch, now a cooperative supporting 20 families, had given him purpose. Besides, someone needs to teach him proper roping. His father's technique is all wrong. Jake laughed. This from the man who once roped his own horse by mistake. Once 30 years ago, their banter was interrupted by approaching riders. Eleanor tensed instinctively, though she recognized Sheriff Morrison's deputy, Tom Crawford, accompanied by a woman she didn't know. "Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Sullivan," Crawford tipped his hat. "This is Mrs. Ruth Hendricks from Silver City. Well, perhaps she should explain. Ruth Hendricks was perhaps 30. Well-dressed, but with haunted eyes Eleanor recognized too well. She dismounted carefully, as if movement hurt. "Mrs. Sullivan," Ruth began, voice trembling. "I heard what you did, how you stood up to powerful men, helped other women escape bad situations. That is, my husband." She stopped, gathering courage. "My husband keeps me locked in our house, says it's for my own good, that I'm delicate, but I'm not sick, just prisoner in my own home." Eleanor took Ruth's hands, feeling them shake. "Come inside. Tell me everything." Over tea, Ruth's story emerged a wealthy husband who controlled every aspect of her life, who'd convinced the town she was fragile and needed constant supervision. No chains like Eleanor had endured, but imprisonment nonetheless. "The law says he's within his rights," Ruth finished bitterly. "A husband's authority over his wife." "Laws can change," Eleanor said firmly. "And until they do, we find other ways." She glanced at Jake, who nodded. They'd helped a dozen women like Ruth over the years, using the network they'd built to provide safe passage, new identities when needed, legal support when possible. As they made plans, Ruth would stay with them while Jake contacted a sympathetic judge in Santa Fe. Eleanor marveled at how far they'd come. The broken woman found beneath the hay had become someone others turned to for strength. That evening, as stars emerged over the desert, the Sullivans hosted their weekly gathering. Former victims of Thornton's schemes, new settlers, old-timers all mingled freely. Wade Garrett sat in a corner, his gunfighting days behind him, teaching checkers to a group of children. He'd served 2 years in prison before Eleanor advocated for his release, arguing he'd paid his debt. Now he worked as a guard for the school, fierce in protecting what he'd once helped destroy. "Eleanor," a soft voice called. She turned to find Mary Littlefoot, one of her first students, now grown and preparing for teachers' college back east. "I wanted to thank you again. Without your recommendation." "You earned your place. Mary, I just opened a door you were always meant to walk through." As the evening progressed, Jake found Eleanor standing apart, watching their community with mixed emotions. "What's troubling you?" "Sometimes I wonder what Mother would think. Her daughter, once chained in darkness, now helping build something like this." Tears glinted in her eyes. "I wish she could see it." "She does," Jake said softly. "In every child you teach, every woman you help find freedom, every family given a second chance. That's her legacy living through you." Eleanor turned in his arms. "And Mary, would she approve of what you've become?" Jake considered. "I think she'd be glad I found purpose again. Found love again." He kissed Eleanor gently. She had a generous heart. She'd want me happy, and I am happier than I ever imagined when I bought that cabin. Young Jake ran up, launching himself at his parents. "Mama, Papa, Grandpa says I can help drive cattle tomorrow." "Did he now?" Eleanor scooped up her son. "And what does Grandpa say about bedtime for young cowboys?" "That growing boys need rest," James called out, trying to look stern and failing. As Eleanor carried their son inside, Jake lingered on the porch. Sheriff Morrison had arrived, bringing news from Phoenix. The territorial legislature was considering new laws protecting women's property rights, influenced by Eleanor's testimony years before. Change came slowly, but it came. "Jake," Eleanor called from inside. "Little Jake wants his story." The story was always the same, a cowboy who found treasure in an unexpected place. Jake told it differently each time, adding new details, but the heart remained constant. Sometimes the greatest riches came disguised as hardship, and love could bloom in the darkest ground. Later, with their son asleep and the house quiet, Jake and Eleanor sat by their bedroom window, watching moonlight paint the desert silver. "No regrets?" Eleanor asked, as she did sometimes. "None," Jake answered, as he always did. How could I regret the path that brought me here? The pain shaped me, but it didn't define me." She traced the faint scars on her wrists, no longer hidden but worn as reminder of survival. "That woman in chains, sometimes I can barely remember her. Other times, she's as close as my shadow." "Both are you," Jake said. "The survivor and the teacher, the victim and the advocate. All the pieces make you whole." A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The desert lived its nocturnal life, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs, but in this house built on transformed sorrow, in this community grown from ashes of greed, something precious thrived. "I love you, Jake Sullivan." Eleanor said simply, "Thank you for buying that cabin." "Thank you for surviving until I found you." They sat in comfortable silence, two souls who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something luminous from the ruins. Outside, Willow Creek slept peacefully, a testament to what could grow when courage met compassion. In the morning, there would be children to teach, disputes to settle, Ruth Hendricks's situation to resolve. The work of transformation never ended. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. Eleanor thought of all the women still trapped in various prisons, physical, legal, social. The work wasn't finished. Perhaps it never would be, but each life touched, each child educated, each family restored added light to the world. The darkness that had once consumed her had become fuel for a different kind of fire. "Ready for bed?" Jake asked. In a moment, Eleanor stood, moving to check on their son once more. He slept peacefully, unaware of the price paid for his freedom to grow up whole and unafraid. That was as it should be. The next generation need not carry the full weight of the previous one's pain. When she returned, Jake had lit a candle, its warm glow pushing back the night. They prepared for bed with the easy rhythm of long partnership, each movement a small declaration of normalcy hard-won. As Eleanor settled beside her husband, she thought one more time of that desperate woman in chains, alone in the dark, holding on to sanity by threads. That woman could never have imagined this love, purpose, community, a son, a future bright with possibility. Rich Cowboy bought an old cabin for 50 cents, then found a shackled bride hidden beneath the hay. She murmured. "Best investment I ever made," Jake replied, pulling her close. Eleanor smiled against his shoulder. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight she was free, loved, and home. The chains were gone, transformed into links of community, bonds of affection, connections that strengthened rather than imprisoned. In the schoolhouse, books waited for eager hands. In the garden, vegetables grew toward harvest. In hearts throughout the valley, hope bloomed where despair once reigned. This was Thornton's true defeat, not his death, but the transformation of his cruelty into kindness, his greed into generosity, his chains into choices freely made. The candle flickered and died, leaving them in darkness. But it was a different darkness, now soft, safe, chosen. Eleanor closed her eyes and slept without dreams, held secure in the arms of a man who'd paid 50 cents for a broken cabin and gained a universe of love. The desert wind whispered through Willow Creek, carrying the scent of sage and promise, and in a modest house where horror had been transformed into hope, the Sullivans slept peacefully, their love a quiet triumph over all the darkness that had tried and failed to claim them. Thank you for listening to this story from the American frontier. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, love, and justice from the Old West, we'd love to hear where in the world you're listening from. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eleanor and Jake's journey in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful historical narratives to life.